You want to die, bro?
We're all gonna die if we don't do something.
I'm calling in from Victoria, otherwise known as Metulia, and that means place of smoked herring in Lukwungan. And I really think it's important to have a land acknowledgement. And I think most of us are calling in from Turtle Island, which is North America. And it is very important to realize all of our histories and how we came to be here in this moment and this time today. And that all these territories that we stand on and work on and live on are actually unceded. So they're actually illegally occupied. And so Save Old Growth Coordination Team mainly organizes from and produces actions on unceded territories of the Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And from where I'm from in Victoria or Metulia, it's Lukwungan Wasanich territories. So thank you, everyone. And I think something that's not talked about enough about land acknowledgements is that it actually requires action and behavioral change and commitment to more than just a discussion. And I ask that you keep that in mind throughout tonight's talk. I'm really excited to announce the A22 Declaration. And A22 is an international network of high-risk civil resistance campaigns across 10 different countries. Each campaign has a location-specific demand to mitigate climate change through robust legislation relevant to their country of origin, state or region, etc. And I'd like to just read this declaration of A22 Network. We are the last generation of the old world. We are here today to say we will create a new world, where humanity embraces itself, forgives itself, loves itself, and commits to continue our great adventure. As the last generation, we will do whatever it takes to protect our generation and all future generations, as is our inalienable right. The old world is dying. We are in the last hour, the darkest hour. This world is being decimated before our eyes. We are in between moments, and what we do now decides the fate of both this world and the next. So we decide we are no longer indulging in our fears, our despair, our resentments. We are putting ourselves behind us. Together, in community, we are taking hold of a higher purpose, the source of what it is to be truly human. It calls to us across the ages, and with its power, we will bring down those who kill to maintain the regimes of extraction. This is the old world. It cannot continue. We are here to make clear, humanity is better than to give in to extinction. We are here to say society has not turned away from love and truth. It has not embraced evil and death. The world we desire, the one we can have, is already in reach, but we have to reach for it. But we are not here to highlight, plead, or entertain. We are here to reach for the change that is required for this to happen. We are here to force governments to slash carbon emissions, nothing less. We are here for actions and not words. We have a plan. We are mobilizing in our many nations and many cultures. Teams will win projects. Projects will make demands on governments. We are reaching out to anyone who will reach back and join hands to create this new world. If we are refused, we will disrupt, week after week, as those who came before us did many times in the struggle for human rights. We speak directly to the public and recruit in hundreds of open meetings. We commit to mass civil disobedience. This is our solemn responsibility. Sacred rights require a sacred duty to defend them. And until everyone is free, none of us are. Only then will justice be done. We will not fall into the trap of hating the other. The other is a part of all of us. Our hands do not hold weapons and our hearts are open. We are humanity, believing in humanity. We are democracy. We are open and nonviolent. We are care and we are freedom. We will accept the consequences of our actions and look our destiny directly in the eye. Bring it on. While there remains breath in our bodies, we will not stop. This is our life now. We are the last generation, but we are also the first. We are everywhere. We are coming. Everything will change. The old becomes the new, and everyone can change. And so the A22 Declaration, once again, this international network of high-risk civil resistance campaigns, that declaration was released on April of 2022. We're going to move on to what is Save Old Growth. So it is a civil resistance campaign that was started in Vancouver, British Columbia. And our demand is to pass legislation to immediately end all old growth logging in the province of British Columbia. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can try to enact this demand. The tactics that we have chosen with Save Old Growth include two different phases. So there's a mobilization phase and there's an action phase. And right now we're in the end of our second action phase. And so an action phase means that we'll be sitting on roads, we'll be gluing ourselves to things. We're going to be causing disruption on purpose to essentially get people's attention. And this does involve a lot of risk, both personally and even collectively with Save Old Growth. One example was last week, the Malahat Highway was closed, and this morning, the Ironworkers Bridge was also closed briefly because people were sitting in front of traffic. And the other tactic that we have is called our mobilization phase. And this essentially means that we're reaching out to community members, to interested people, those who want to learn more about us and maybe even get involved and sit on a road or two. And so what that looks like is we host a lot of talks publicly, maybe at a church, maybe at a public event center, and we give the introduction a little bit more in depth about Save Old Growth and what you can do to help us, even if that doesn't mean sitting in the road, or if it does, which I would personally encourage. And I would also encourage that if you're not in British Columbia, perhaps you have your own sort of civil resistance network, part of the A22 network, in your own region. And if you're interested in that or Save Old Growth, someone can post our website in the chat to us all. So now, for what we've all been waiting for, we are going to welcome Peter Kalmus to a Q&A style for about 15 minutes. And I have a couple of topics, Peter, if you're able to just start us off with possibly a brief introduction of yourself, maybe your involvement in the IPCC Working Group 3 and what that is for those of us who don't know, and your recent experience in civil disobedience. And then perhaps we'll have some questions from the audience.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to start by expressing my deep gratitude and respect for all of you, and especially for those of you that are risking. I think this is the start of something new, and not new exactly, but there's a new energy, there's new urgency, and I think it's right. I think we're on the right side of history, clearly, and we got to keep going. And this whole incremental thing is completely bullshit, and we all feel that, and that's why we're here. And I think our sense of urgency and the kind of clear communication that we're able to do through nonviolent civil disobedience is getting that message out to the mainstream, to the public, and that's huge, right? There shouldn't even be climate activism. There should just be a bunch of humans that want to have a livable planet. So that's how mainstream I'm hoping that this gets, and it has to happen quickly. So yeah, it's you know, for me to have risked and then to been arrested, like I feel like I'm part of something that's way bigger than myself. And you know, I still haven't had a lot of time to talk to other riskers, so I don't know if that's like a kind of universal feeling, but I feel it very strongly, and I feel solidarity and siblingship with all of the people that are supporting riskers and with all of the riskers. So it feels, to me, it just personal level, it feels amazing too. And it feels like it's been too long coming. So anyway, just again to express gratitude and respect for what you're doing, and also for what you're trying to protect. Right, those old growth trees are they're elders of our planet. There's nothing. I mean, there's nothing else to say really. They deserve to be here. They deserve to live. They deserve to be treated as people, in my opinion. And they definitely deserve to be protected. I'm basically a mid-career climate scientist. I've started to finally get into some interesting work over the last few years that to me is like what I've been trying to get to for a long time. So that's ecological forecasting. So looking at the what's happening to coral reefs and what's going to happen to them in coming decades, and then applying those same methods of ecological forecasting to humans, and how the neighborhoods of the cities of the world are going to start getting hotter under different climate scenarios, and how that extreme humid heat, some of which is being felt right now in the Indian subcontinent, how that's going to affect human bodies in those regions of the world under those different climate scenarios. So that's what I've kind of been up to in terms of my job. The Working Group 3 report made it extremely clear that we need to have a complete moratorium on all new fossil fuel infrastructure, and we've got to peak global greenhouse gas emissions right now and start ramping them down. So that's the kind of the top line, basically, of what it said. It also had some really good stuff on climate justice within nations and between the nations of the global north and the global south. The summary for policymakers was watered down, but the report itself has some really mind-blowing statistics on the global rich and their emissions versus the global average and the global poor. And the one, in my opinion, bad thing about the report is that it still centers direct air capture as a possible solution, which I don't personally believe is a viable solution. I think that's pure speculation, and it's a dangerous distraction from what we really need to do, which is to end the fossil fuel industry as quickly as possible, and to change the goal of our socioeconomic system, which is our system as a human collective, right, for existing on this planet. And right now, this socioeconomic system has as its primary goal the accrual of capital to those who already enclose capital. So in other words, more money flowing to the already rich. And we need to change the goal of that system to flourishing for all people and flourishing for all life on Earth. So, and I think the IPCC Working Group 3 report was, in its own way, a step toward, a huge collaboration of scientists actually coming out and saying that. So I wish the summary for policymaker made those aspects more clear, and I wish that it didn't speculate about direct air capture, but it was a baby step in the right direction. And I think that the kinds of actions that we're starting to engage in now, and that Save Old Growth is starting to engage in, will accelerate that conversation further into the mainstream. All right, check.
So the question in the chat reads, what made you decide to act as Scientist Rebellion when you did?
So it was a feeling of desperation at the inaction of world leaders. And I feel called to do everything I can to stand up for this beautiful planet, and for young people, and for future generations, and for old growth trees, and for coral reefs, and for the Amazon rainforest, and for my sons. I felt like without trying nonviolent civil disobedience, I had not done everything I could. And I know this will be an ongoing journey for me and for all of us to try to kind of escalate in terms of our effectiveness and in terms of our solidarity and in terms of our organizing, which is a fascinating thing. Like, I was always a really bad organizer, but suddenly, because of this action and because of all of the connections that came from the action, I actually feel like now I really get it. And I'm like really helping to create connections within the kind of international community, and that feels just amazing. Like, because I've always been such an introvert. So if you want to learn a little bit more about kind of my motivations, I did write a Guardian article that came out on April 6th, simultaneous with the action.
Okay, so thank you, by the way, for that answer. Our next question is, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle for most people to act on our crisis and really understand the urgency and acuity of the situation we're in?
Great question. I think it's a feeling of being alone, to be honest. So I think that's that's the first time I really had that thought clearly. So I'm really grateful for that question. Um, I've often said that the first step to climate activism is to join together with other people, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But now I can clearly feel that the reason I've had that instinct to say we got to, if you want to become a climate activist, first thing you do is join with people in your region. It's because that feeling of being alone is the single biggest barrier to people acting.
Yeah, that definitely speaks to me, and I've heard that echoed many times. I think one of your books, you talk about climate revolution. I'm curious what climate revolution looks like to you, and what does that actually entail?
Great question. It's been evolving over the years in my own brain. I just tweeted today that one thing that we're going to see in the coming years as climate disasters intensify and world leaders continue to just run interference for the fossil fuel industry is that people are going to realize that climate revolution actually means climate revolution because the people in charge have made it, they've demonstrated. I mean, it's just empirical, right? Like, we wish it wasn't the case, but they've empirically demonstrated that they're not going to voluntarily step up and do what needs to be done. They're going to keep spewing this net zero by 2050 bullshit. And they might once they see kind of what we're starting to do, they might try to up that a little bit. They're going to try to greenwash and they're going to try to make it look like they're acting, but to buy more time. But I think they made it clear that they're not going to act. So right now, I think it looks like civil disobedience and the kind of stuff that we're doing. I think that's what climate revolution looks like. Next year and the year after that, I'm not sure what it's going to look like. If we have an extreme heat wave, like in the first chapter of Ministry for the Future, that kills 1 million people somewhere in the global south, then climate revolution might look a lot different than it does right now in 2022. So I'm not. It's unclear. I think we all have to keep an open mind and keep 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 acting with great love. Keep trying to stay as spiritually centered as we can. I think we should all be developing literally spiritual practices, whatever that means for you, and keeping ourselves as happy and healthy as we possibly can. But then keeping an open mind and realizing that we are nature defending herself, and we are the spokespeople and the protectors of this planet. So it's like it's bigger. This is so much bigger than us, right? I keep saying that, and it's really true. And that gives you a lot of protection, right? Protection from fear, protection from worrying about how people are going to respond to what you do. You just keep kind of staying in sync with you could call it the the sisterhood, the brotherhood, the siblinghood of this movement. You stay in tune with that. You stay in tune with those old growth trees. You stay in tune with this earth, and you stay in tune with the children today and future generations. And that's what we're fighting for. And you can do no wrong. So
I've definitely found a lot of community in acting together. But speaking of taking quite transgressive actions, like sitting on a highway, I get this question a lot: is what would you say to people who are really understandably quite upset by these disruptions that are enacted by civil resistance campaign?
I'm still kind of struggling with that, to be honest. I don't think I have a really great response to that. I mean, obviously, we're trying to protect everyone, even people who don't understand why we're doing what we're doing. But you can't really say that to someone who doesn't get it, right? Because they'll just feel insulted. So I think you just have to, when you're confronted with somebody like that, you follow your breath and you center yourself, and you try not to react with anger, but again, you just channel the earth and you speak to the whole earth, and you say, like, we're on the verge of losing everything. And the media has been in denial. They have not been kind of getting this story out to the people that what is actually at risk. And we could lose everything. So that's why we're doing this. And I think eventually, as it starts to, it's already starting to get out there, right? And I see fissures already starting to form in society, and I see more support coming towards us, and I see the deniers and the complainers sort of, at least at this point, getting weaker and losing support. So I don't know if there's going to be a backlash and that changes. It's going to be, I know it's going to get more intense for sure, and I think it's going to be unpredictable. But yeah, I would just try to. I guess I don't have a pithy response, but I would say center yourself and be that spokesperson for the earth.
Another great question from someone in the chat here is, what do you say to people who say it's too late to act?
That's an easy one. It's not too late. It'll never be too late. It just won't. I mean, it's like every little bit of CO2, every little mote of fossil fuel we burn makes it worse. That's it. So, and that'll be true up until the end, whatever the end is. Obviously we all are mortal, so eventually we'll all die. So for each of us personally, that's the end. But we have to keep fighting, and no matter how bad it gets, there's never a moment where it will make sense to stop fighting.
As a person who is part of the civil resistance campaign, I very much relate to that. Thank you. Another question was, as a scientist, what are a couple of consequences of climate change that you're aware of that aren't being communicated to the popular discourse?
Yeah, great question. So one thing that frustrates me is that I get the sense that the public doesn't understand that the impacts that are coming, that we're currently experiencing from global heating, are irreversible. So it's not like when there's a bunch of plastic bags in your park and it bugs you, but you could just go clean them up, or someone could clean them up. This is like irreversible stuff, right? We're not going to be able to make the ice sheets reform. We're not going to be able to make the sea levels go back down. If we lose the Amazon rainforest, we're not going to get it back anytime in our lifetimes. So that's why, again, like to tie to the previous question, it's really important to keep fighting and fighting for every little fraction of a degree. So that's one thing. And then I would say that the two things that kind of keep me up personally the most at night are just extreme humid heat. Like I already mentioned. There's this, I don't know how to say it. There's this feeling of this kind of like sickness when I think about what's happening to the planet and how it's irreversible and how it's unnecessary, that I can't really put into words. I think it's the grief that I carry. But it just feels like, I don't know, like I don't know, like imagine trees turning into plastic or something. It sort of feels kind of like that, and there's just something so sad about it. But we all carry like a lot of emotions at the same time, and I have a lot of joy too, and not doing a great job expressing it tonight really, but I do, and a lot of solidarity. But I don't know why I just thought of expressing that. The other impact that has me really concerned is drought and its effect on the future of our food supply, and how that's going to affect most affected people and people in the global south first and worst. And we're already starting to see that play out. So and then those two impacts, the extreme heat and the food insecurity, could drive a lot of geopolitical instability, which is like a kind of a polite way to say like climate warfare. So that's, I don't want to depress anyone, but I think these are the stakes, and I think we all get that. But I don't think that all the people outside of this call get that yet. And I don't want to scare people, but I think there's this narrative of like, we have to have like quote unquote positive messaging. And I think it's been really, really slowing down action. And so like positive messaging, I believe is actually dangerous at this point, because what we need is action as fast as possible. And it's like a kind of positive messaging is sort of like a drug that I think is keeping the public asleep right now. So I think the right messaging is, this is fucking terrifying. It really is. Like, we have to accept that, but we join together and we fight as hard as we can. Like, that's, I think, probably the right messaging. And I just want to say one more thing, which is that I've gotten much more of a sense from the young people that I've interacted with since the April 6th Scientist Rebellion that global action and a lot of the actions that have followed after that in that period have given young people more hope, not less hope. So, I don't know, just one. I'll take the next question. I went too long on that one.
No, this is great. I had maybe one that I should have asked first, and it's kind of a two-parter. So the first one is, what did you do to get arrested? And the follow-up to that is, how did your colleagues react to your arrest, and do they support the civil resistance?
Oh yeah, great questions. Okay, so our action in Los Angeles was part of the Global Scientist Rebellion, which, hats off to the lead organizers for that. I mean, when I first heard about it, I'm like, I got to be part of that. So I just contributed to making the local action in Los Angeles happen. And it was almost like maybe like a mind-numbingly simple action. And I think that was part of what I thought was attractive about the action as it was being discussed and designed. So we just walked up to Chase Bank, JP Morgan Chase Bank in downtown Los Angeles. 4 of us were risking. There were 4 double doors. So there were 4 door handles and 2 pairs of doors. And we locked the doors shut with kryptonite bicycle chains. And then we locked our wrists with cheap hardware store chains and the padlocks to those door handles. And then we just waited. So after 1 hour, they closed the bank, which is great. We cheered. And then after 2 hours, the cops warned us that if we didn't leave, they'd arrest us. And then after about 3 hours, 3.5 hours, they finally arrested us. And then we were in custody for about 8 hours. And we were released shortly after midnight. And we were charged with trespassing. So that was the action. And then the consequences for me with my colleagues, so far I, still have my job. A few colleagues have expressed support to me privately. I have not been, I'm a little scared to say this now, but yeah, I haven't been reprimanded for the action. My institution verified that I was acting on my personal time, which I was for that action. And that was, for me, that was the extent of it so far. I don't think I've had any, I don't think any of my scientific colleagues have reached out and expressed, negative feelings for the action and said that, that none of them have yelled at me and told me that I shouldn't be doing it, which is actually extraordinary. So there have been, of course, like the usual cranks that like to get in touch with me after stuff like this, but they don't amount to anything.
Well, that's great. Fingers crossed that you will not get reprimanded at any point in the future for that.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
So why is there such a disconnect between what we know and how we're responding to that information? And specifically in regards to, what you know as a scientist and media, what might that look like in the future in your ideal situation?
Yeah, good question. And again, like something, I think this action kind of like made a lot of connections happen in my brain. So I think I have a new answer to that question that is a better answer than I've given before, which is that there's different levels of knowing. And it's basically as simple as that. Like, you can know the facts, but that's a honestly pretty superficial level of knowing. And you can know the facts about something and not, look at, there's disasters happening in the global south all the time. Many of them are climate related disasters. And you read about it in the paper, people read about it in the global north. They don't always respond emotionally. So they know the facts of what's happening, but it's a very superficial kind of knowing. And then when you know it at deeper levels and deeper levels emotionally, kind of into your core, and the different, I think there's different strata of denial, like sort of like an onion. And once it gets to like a deep enough level, then you start really acting. And even I think even despair is a kind of denial, because I know that this could be a kind of controversial thing to say, but I think despair is still, you don't have the full information, which is that what's happening is not necessary and it can be stopped. And but it takes more work to actually get in the fight. And it's you let yourself, at some level, you let yourself off the hook if you sink into despair, because then you feel like you don't have to act. I think it's a devil's bargain, because if you do that, you pay. And then obviously this happens subconsciously and you can't always stop it, but you pay a very, very heavy price if you go into despair, just psychologically. Like, that's not a good place to be at all. So I don't know. Anyway, I just think there's a lot of levels of knowing what's going on, and I'm hoping that we can again work together to keep as many people as possible out of despair and getting them to fight alongside us. Now, it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Peter. And it's been so lovely to have you on here and meet you. Yeah, thank you as well for your sacrifice and doing what you're doing, both in knowledge and following through with action. So, yeah.
And back at all of you, I mean, just again, you have my deepest love and respect, and I mean that. Like, I when I do interviews and I think about you guys and climate activists around the world and Indigenous activists around the world, I often tear up because I'm just so grateful for what you guys do. So thank you. It's an honor to talk with you.
Yeah, it's important to know you're not alone.
Exactly.
And on that note, we're going to hear from someone who has also taken action. So Ivana, if you could tell us, when and where you're arrested and why you did that.
Hello, everyone. So I just want to say it's an honor to be here with all of you. So basically, the question of why did you join Save Old Growth? And why are you okay with getting arrested? And just to explain, I am a college instructor. In my past, I have done human rights activist work with various NGOs. And basically, in terms of becoming part of the climate crisis movement, I think we should call it, as opposed to the climate change movement, was, I was doing my individual work. I was recycling, I was changing my diet, I was, watching my actions and my practices, but everything felt very empty. It just felt like there was no kind of movement. And I wasn't noticing that anything structurally or systemically was changing. There was nothing of consequence really that was happening. And then last summer, I went to Fairy Creek and with a colleague, and basically, like many others there, I stood and listened to radio shows of politicians talking about how old growth logging is not as bad, the situation is not as bad. And I think the worst day was when we were actually hearing John Horgan telling people that they had paused old growth logging while listening and watching the trees falling, right? So there was that disconnect in terms of what I realized, what we were being told. And I knew this before, but it was just so blatantly there in front of me. And so at that point, I just realized that, enough is enough. I had had enough of the discourse. I'd had enough of the debates. I'd had enough of the talking. And I felt like, okay, I need to get involved. The other element was, I just realized that as an educator, I had also been telling myself that, well, I teach in my classes and we address the climate emergency. And so I'm doing my part as an educator to spread the word. But really, then that also felt kind of empty because I felt like I was kind of patting myself on the back going, you've done your job. And again, I wasn't seeing anything actually happening. finally, I think it was also talking to other people who would say to me, well, people who have power won't do anything. So what's the point of trying? Exactly what Peter was talking about, the kind of despair, letting it take over. Or people saying, what's the point of trying? So that all, again, sounded very hollow and just an excuse. So together with all of these things coming together for me, seeing how the RCMP were protecting industry rather than people, or the planet, just everything kind of converged for me. And I thought, I do need to do something more, and I want to be a part of the solution. So at that point, it became quite simple for me. Do I want to be a part of the resistance, or do I want to be a part of the problem? And we would basically kind of go around looking at people who just complacently sort of let the powers that be do what they will, and looking at people that resist. And I wanted to be a part of the resistance, if you will, or a part of that change. And at this point, I think that is what it comes down to. Do you want to be a part of that change, whatever form it takes for you? For me, this was, I felt like this was the answer, or at least part of the answer. I'm still involved with other groups and other actions, but for me, this was something that had to happen to wake people up. And it's not pleasant, and it's not, well, sometimes it's fun. Sometimes it gets a little bit nerve-wracking, like walking out into traffic. But at the same time, and even though people can get very angry and upset and yell all kinds of insults, at least they're reacting. And that was, for me, at least there's something happening, even if it's just anger towards us personally. And again, just being able to distance ourselves personally from what's happening in that moment, and realizing, well, at least the conversation is starting. So hopefully I didn't go over the 3 minutes title, but
No, that was great context. Thank you so much. So the next person whom we'll hear from is actually on day 25 of a hunger strike. And I think this person, I think so much of this individual personally. But we'll also hear his arrest testimonial, or multiple arrest testimonial. And so I'd like to invite Howard to just say, how did you get involved in Save Old Growth, and why civil disobedience? And also maybe a little bit about one arrest. And I will say, we're going to give you about 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Title. I think having been a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion on the island here, it was just a natural outgrowth when I was approached to help in the initial organizing of Save Old Growth. It was just like a no-brainer for me. I just looked at what was going on, well, even before XR Vancouver, like, wow, they just came out swinging right from the get-go, so well organized. I can't say enough about everything that's been happening in Vancouver. It's just, they're heroes, each and every one of them. Brent was the inspiration for me, because I just felt there was a lot going on in my life, but I didn't want Brent to do it on his own. And I really wanted to work closely with him, and that led to the hunger strike. So I've got 12 charges, three with Save Old Growth on the highway shutdowns. And then each week I had a reason. I just had to read the latest climate disasters from week to week. So I ended up breaching my conditions. And the third breach was with a judge, and they're quite upset with that. And it was I didn't realize that because it wasn't an impeding that to glue down to the RBC bank, I thought it was going to be relatively safe with that one. And they used the not of good behavior clause in the undertaking that they nailed me on the RBC bank. And then I immediately went to the and I don't recommend planning an action when you're on a hunger strike. So I ended up being transported to the Wilkinson Road maximum security prison for Vancouver Island because Brandon Lake here in Nanaimo was full, which was minimum security. So they put me in solitary there, and it took 8 days to have a lawyer undertake a 2-hour bail hearing to get me out. So I'm on house arrest, for those that don't know it, until my trial, which will probably be next year. And so far as the outcomes of the hunger strike, I do think that the going off fluids was pivotal, and I really recommend people, if they're the 46 solidarity strikers, I suggest if they're contemplating it all, to do it sooner, not later, because you'll be stronger when you do it and you'll be able to go longer. And I suggest that Stephanie's on the call, and her colleague Linda Thayer was instrumental in allowing me to have a science-based shutdown. I didn't base it on the love that was being sent to me to stand down. I did it on science, and they gave me the extra little bit of time to go to 50 hours and feel that I would. It was still a gamble, but it was a gamble that paid off, because it was pivotal in the what happened in what followed in terms of media attention. And it's still going on, right? It's still going on, but I would really like to see it now focus on the young strikers that are coming forward now.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you actually make a really nice connection to Peter Kalmus, because he talks a lot about media and their inaction. And so it's been really quite refreshing to see the media really cover what's going on with you. And once again, thank you so much for your continual sacrifice. And it really speaks to a lot of people, myself included. So I'm going to pass it on to someone else now. And this is one of the coordinators in Vancouver, so-called Vancouver, Zane. And Zane, you got 10 minutes. And please take it away.
So yeah, without beating around the bush, it's my job to tell everyone on this call that it's time to break the law again and again and again until you're arrested, and then doing it again and then doing it again. And I'm not going to try to convince anyone to do anything, right? It's not my job to convince anyone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell everyone how the situation is like and what to do about it objectively, in terms of what's objectively needed, in terms of pushing the government to act, and whether or not you're going to be part of making history. That's your decision. So I'll start by telling people, if you walk down the road every day to work, and there's a house notice every now and then that you always found a bit suspicious, and one day you find out that people are being tortured and abused inside, once you find out, you're complicit, or you break down the door and defend the people. So in terms of breaking down the door, that's obviously a risk, right? So when you break down the door and there's something very dangerous happening inside, you may get hurt yourself, but you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. All societies throughout history are based on the principle that you need to do the right thing and the moral thing, regardless of the consequences, right? When people were fighting fascism in the 30s and the 40s, they weren't doing it because they knew they were going to win. If you're sitting on this call thinking, well, I'm going to join Save World Growth if I know that we can win, then it's definitely not going to work, right? The way in which people win throughout history is when they stop caring about winning, and when they do the right thing, regardless of the consequences and regardless of who's going to follow them. Save World Growth was started by less than 10 people, right? And now we've had the Premier and the Minister of Forests all talking about us, and the cabinet completely shitting themselves, right? The way that happens is that you disrupt the public and you tell the truth in a transgressive manner and emotionally communicate the urgency of the issue. And so there are a few things that weren't mentioned, unfortunately, earlier in the talk, which is that the Amazon is 17% cut down already, right? And that guy in Brazil cuts down 1% every year. So just do the math. In 3 years, 20% of the Amazon will be gone. When that's happened, the Amazon will kill itself, right? And then you look at the Arctic, and the peer-reviewed papers have now showed us that within the next 10 years, by 2035, the Arctic will be melted in the summer. When that happens, half a degree will be added to the global average global average temperatures. When we go over 2 degrees increase of global average temperatures, which is now more or less locked in, we're looking at mass starvation at a scale we've never seen before. What that means concretely is that one day one of us will go into a supermarket and the government will have enforced rations because there isn't enough food due to crop failure, and you'll get into the front of the line and you'll ask for your bag of ration and you'll be told they're out of it, and then you'll say, well, I'm starving so I need more food, but you'll be told by the guard that, well, there isn't anything we can do about it, my hands are tied. And because you're a reasonable person, you'll say, all right, fine, but there's going to be other people in the lineup behind you who are going to pull out a gun and someone will shoot the guard, and there's going to be a stampede and people will die in that process, right? Societal collapse is not something that happens in a vacuum. When we go over 2 degrees increase of global average temperatures, we're looking at 1 billion people on the move. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum. That means extreme suffering at a scale we've never seen before. It means mass slaughter, it means mass rape, it means mass death at a scale we've never seen before. And what that means is that each and every one of us, regardless of our economic status, regardless of our race, our skin color, whatever, right? Regardless of all of those things, we've got absolute moral obligations to enter into resistance. And what we're demanding is legislative change to end all old growth logging in BC. And it's entirely possible because it's been done again and again throughout history. So I'll just give this one example of the freedom rides in the 1960s. You had 13 people, including John Lewis, who got on a bus. They knew they were going to probably get killed. They went down to they went down to Alabama, and their bus was caught by the KKK. It was set on fire with everyone inside. They somehow got out. They were beaten up by a crowd. Then they were thrown in prison. But before they were thrown in prison, the ambulance drivers didn't want to take them to the hospital because they were hated so much. And within 3 days, 24 people came down. And then within 5 months, you had 430 people in prison, right? By the time you had 430 people in prison, they went from being terrorists to being the people who pushed the federal government to introduce legislation to desegregate interstate buses, right? So you're a terrorist until you're pushing the government to desegregate interstate buses. So it flips. So there's a binary tipping point beyond which no more further arrests and imprisonment can be tolerated. So all these people who say, well, getting arrested is a sign of privilege, we shouldn't risk arrest, we shouldn't enter into a legal system, historically speaking, it's pure bullshit. Because again and again, throughout history, we've seen people of color, marginalized people, especially marginalized people, enter into resistance again and again and again, and disrupt the public. So that's the key principle here, is disrupting the public. People in the civil rights movement weren't doing bad things to bad people and standing outside the offices of the congressman. What they were doing was they were sitting down on the bridge in Selma, Alabama, right? The racist governor said, George Wallace said that, I can't allow this to happen because it's going to disrupt the commute of the good people of Selma. They were sitting down on lunch counters, disrupting people's lunches. They were sitting down on buses, disrupting transit, okay? That's what you do if you want to change society. You non-violently and transgressively tell the truth, then you go to prison or you get arrested. If you get arrested in Vancouver or Victoria, if it's your first arrest, it's probably nothing, right? You're looking at a few hours of community service. If you get arrested 2-3 times, a few more hours of community service. If you get arrested 10 times like me, you're looking at prison time. But the consequences have never been lower in order to enter into resistance. And the costs of not entering into resistance have never been higher. So it's a complete no-brainer, right? Everything that we're working towards, our careers, our degrees, they just don't exist, right? It's a pure myth that's being sold in university campuses, in our jobs. There's no future. The only future you have is if you put yourself in harm's way in order to prevent greater harm. And so people will give more details about what's coming down the road, but if people want to learn more, you can come to the General Assemblies 7th of May onwards at Holy Cross Church. So write this down, please, everyone. Holy Cross Church, 7th of May onwards, 4580 Walden Street. You can come there, you can attend the General Assembly, and you can join a block team. What these block teams do is that they go on the highway and they disrupt the highway, then half the people get arrested. And we've got 3 more actions coming up in Vancouver. So if people are interested, we meet the night before on sort of, we're meeting tomorrow night and Thursday night for the actions the next day. So we get up in the morning, like it's a job because it is. And then we get in a car, we go to a location, we get off, we get on the highway. It's scary and it's really fun. People get arrested. And then you come out of the jail and people are there to greet you. And it's not the end of the world, right? The end of the world is the end of the world, is what we need to recognize here. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I think I've exceeded my time. So I'll pass it back to Tidal. And I think we're going to go into breakouts. And there's some forms that you need to fill out and everything, so we know how to keep track of you. But other than that, it's very simple and straightforward what needs to be done.
Yeah, thanks for that, Zane. Again, reminds me of Kalmus saying that it is not too late to act, but we have to do so together. And before we go into the breakout rooms, I will ask that you think of Win Bruce, who is the US man who immolated himself in front of the Capitol building, I believe on Earth Day. And it was a call out at government inaction towards climate change. This man was obviously very desperate, and he is trying to bring our attention to what needs to be done and the gap between what we're doing and what needs to be done. So I just wanted to say that other than participating, which is really the most important thing that anyone could do, we also do have a donation link that someone will put into the chat for me. And I'd also suggest sharing that with your friends. We do not make a lot of money from this, and it's a lot of time. It is a full-time job, and we do have to sustain ourselves. So it is part of that. But ultimately, it is really about getting people involved and, what can you do physically, directly to help out with this? I just wanted to thank you for all of your time and your energy and your consideration, really, for not only yourself, but the whole world. And I want to say that we are not alone, and it is not too late, and we can do something, but it has to be together. Consider getting arrested. You will not regret it.